Hello everyone, Sabrina here from Scrappy Tales Crafts. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be creating 4 cards using some of the new products from our latest Heartfelt Wings collection. I'm mainly going to be focusing on this stamp here called Heartfelt Wings. This was my favorite stamp in the collection, so that's why I named it after the collection. And I'm going to be using all 3 butterflies from this set in a few of the sentiments. I'm going to start by stamping out the large butterfly, and I'm going to be doing a watercolor technique that I haven't done in a while, but it's really pretty and it's a relaxing technique too. So I added the large butterfly into my Misty, picked it up with the door, and I'm just going to ink up this image with mustard seed, abandoned coral, and carved pumpkin distress oxide inks. You can see there's no particular way I'm adding the ink. I'm just trying to have different sections of each color. I am overlapping the colors slightly so that they do blend together, but I'm being careful not to add too much dark color to my mustard seed because that is a light color. Now, if you do contaminate your ink pads, it's very easy to take color off of them, so it's not a huge deal if some of the red gets into the yellow. Alright, and then you can see here I stamped another butterfly. They're all going to be slightly different because I added ink in different areas of the butterfly each time, but they're all going to have a very similar look once you take a paintbrush with some water on it, or just a water brush, and move that pigment from the stamped areas into the white parts of the paper. So you can leave it with the white if you like that contrast, but I wanted this watercolor look to these butterflies, so that's why I'm using a slightly damp paintbrush to move the color. Now you're going to want to do this pretty early, so you can see I did 2 butterflies here, but off camera I did another 2 and colored those. And that is because the longer you leave Distress Oxide inks to dry, the harder it is to move the ink. And you can see I actually blended some of that red color onto my glass mat and picked it up with that brush to move it back onto my paper so that it had a slightly darker look to it. But if you color it right away, then you can avoid that. So to add to that watercolor effect, I did squish each of the 3 same colors onto my glass mat, added some water, and I'm going to splatter each of these butterflies with the same inks. I'm using a very thin paintbrush, so these splatters are very small, and I'm fine with that because I didn't want to lose any of that detail on the stamp. So I'm going to show this technique again with a blue butterfly this time. I'm using Broken China, Mermaid Lagoon, and Blueprint Sketch for this butterfly. I'm going to start by inking it with my lightest color, which was Broken China, or Peacock Feathers. Yes, Peacock Feathers. Then Mermaid Lagoon, then Blueprint Sketch. Stamp it out. And oftentimes I do need to stamp twice, so you're going to see I lift this up. It's almost completely stamped, but I'm just going to go back in with the same colors, trying to map out the same areas I did the first time. I think in this instance I just went with the 2 lighter blues. No, just kidding, I went with all 3. And then once I stamp that down, I'm going to have a perfect impression. And I did hand draw these butterflies, and I think they would look very pretty stamped with black ink and watercolored or Copic colored to make it look like a monarch. You can see that there's a lot of detail drawn into this stamp, so you really don't have to do any extreme coloring with this. I am going to link to my Instagram page where you can see some of the design team's work because they do some phenomenal coloring with this butterfly. Another great idea is to create an alcohol inked background and stamp this over it so that you create that same artistic looking style. So I think there's a lot you can do with this butterfly. I'm going to put it into our new pop-up stand for today's card, but you can also make it into an A2 shaped card because it is such a large image. So here you can see I'm doing the same technique by moving that pigment into the white areas of the paper, and for some reason the blue just isn't moving quite as much as the yellow butterfly did. So again, I'm going to squish some of the same inks onto my glass mat, pick that up with a wet brush and move it onto my paper. I'm just going to be careful that I'm not picking up too much ink, otherwise you will possibly overblend, and I still want for the most part to have those highlights peeking through the paper. Alright, so now we have the 2 butterflies left from the stamp set. These are slightly smaller, but just as detailed and just as pretty. So for the top one here, I am using, I think, festive berries, picked raspberry, and seedless preserves. And then for this bottom butterfly, I'm using Dusty Concord, Blueprint Sketch, and Salty Ocean. So I'm going to be creating more of a pinky red butterfly and a purple blue. And this time that's stamped out on its first impression because these are slightly smaller. But I am doing the same thing where I am just moving the pigment to the white paper. And here you can see, because I immediately started watercoloring these butterflies, the ink is moving a lot easier because it's still wet. So these butterflies can be moths, I think, too, just because this one that I'm coloring here has a thicker body. So I think it can go either way. And if you want to see the entire Heartfelt Wings collection, I encourage you to check out my recent product showcase video. I am giving away 2 $50 gift cards there, and it just goes over all the new products. It's such a pretty release. I spent a little bit longer drawing this release than I normally do, and that's just because, like these butterflies, there's a lot of more realistic looking images, and there's a lot more details in the dies than what I normally do. So it's all around a super pretty spring collection. Right now I'm just stamping a few of the sentiments from the same stamp set using the same inks I used on my butterflies, and then we can start working on the pop-up. So I'm going to be pulling in this new A7 pop-up stand die set. I'm going to use every die from this to create my pop-ups. And you are going to need to cut out each die twice to create an entire base. For my first 2 cards, I'm just using the base. I did not use any of the panel layering die cuts to go on top. And just to accent these a little bit, make them slightly match the butterflies more, I thought I would do the same splattering that I did on the butterflies using the same inks. So for my blue, again, I used Peacock Feathers, Mermaid Lagoon, and Blueprint Sketch. And then I did the same thing with the yellow inks that I used for the yellow butterfly for my second stand. And then for my third stand, I did want to use those decorative panels that are included in the die set along with the solid panels. I cut both the decorative pieces and the solid from white cardstock, and I'm just layering them together for a tone-on-tone look. I really like this little bit of detail. It's very lacy looking, and I thought that it matched those smaller butterflies nicely. So here you can see I'm just gluing them all up, and as I go through each one, I'm going to stack it behind my paperweight, and then I can glue these panels to my remaining 2 pop-up stands. So like I said, you need 2 to create 1 stand, but these are very simple to glue together and assemble. I'd argue it's probably our easiest die or pop-up die that we've ever brought out. Before I assemble it, I did want a couple ovals for my 2 butterflies, so I'm pulling in this A7 oval book add-on, but I do encourage you guys to use the rose intricate oval that we brought out in this recent collection. I'm not sure why I didn't grab that one. For some reason, I was dead set on using this one. So I might create a similar card using the hot foil butterflies from this collection and that intricate oval to create a similar look. But this die is very pretty. I'm going to use the solid oval, which I die cut from purple, and then the 2 decorative pieces, which I cut from white cardstock. I'm going to glue up 2 of these because I want them to go back to back in my pop-up. You really don't need to. I just like the look of a, I guess, finished 360 card design. And while I was cutting these, I also did a solid white oval with the purple details, and I'm going to use that for my flat card design. Now I'm reinforcing the score lines on these 2 base pieces, and they're the exact same die. And I'm just going to line up those 1/2 inch ends together. And you can see that they're pointing inwards, so I'm going to flip it around and make sure that they're completely back to back. On the tops, there is a slit with a hole. You can kind of see that there on each of those ends. So when you glue them together, you're going to want to make sure that they perfectly align and that you still see those slits and those circles. And then that's it. That creates the little stand. So that took less than 2 minutes to completely glue together, and I'd argue it's just as easy as scoring and folding and cutting a regular card base. Alright, so here I have that purple oval that I glued together. On it, I'm going to add my 2 watercolor butterflies. And I'm going to add glue to the front, very bottom of the oval, and attach it to the front of my pop-up stand. And then I'm going to glue my other oval to the back side the exact same way, just going to add glue to the bottom front of it and stick it down. I'm just going to hold it there for a few seconds to make sure it's nicely adhered. This is a pretty heavy piece. And that is one way you can use the pop-up stand, and in this way you can pretty much glue whatever you want to it, and you can add a rubber band to the bottom where those slits are so that this card will pop right out of the envelope. But here you can see how it folds flat, and then at the bottom I just added a heartfelt thank you. I am going to show you how to add that rubber band for my last card today. But for a lot of mine, I did not add the rubber band just because I plan on just displaying these in my house and also at trade shows. So anyway, I am now creating the A7 card version of the same card I just made. This is pretty much the same oval, and I glued it onto a white embossed panel. You can maybe see the little bit of texture on that. At the bottom, I added Sending Love from the same stamp set, and then my 2 butterflies. I am going to add some gems to these butterflies, and these are gems from the Scrappy Tales shop. I just found a few that match the colors on each of the butterflies, and I am going to go back to my pop-up card and do the same thing. Now, on this pop-up, you saw that I added an oval to the back side. You can also add more butterflies to the back if you want to, but I didn't feel that it was necessary, and I might go back to that pop-up and add a solid oval to the back of it so that there's an area to write a message. But I'm going to go ahead and glue this flat card design onto my A7 card, and that's going to finish off my first set of coordinating cards. And now we're going to work on those larger butterflies. I'm first going to reinforce the score lines on these bases. Again, I'm going to attach the ends together, making sure that the slits and those little circles line up perfectly back to back. And just making sure it's nicely adhered. I'm spending a couple seconds just pinching those pieces together And then to make sure that it's extra adhered, you can go ahead and fold that base piece down and pinch those corners. And that's it. Super simple, especially if you don't add any decorative panels to the base like I did on these butterfly cards. So I am going to go ahead and just pinch the centers of these. If you want it to fold completely flat in your envelope, I would add a score line right in the middle of the butterfly bodies. And then I'm going to add a small dot of glue to the corners of each of the top butterfly wings so that I can connect each of these together in a circle. And I like to go with 4 butterflies for these cards. You can also just do back-to-back butterflies like we did on the first card with the back-to-back ovals, but there's something about this like full symmetrical 360 card that I really enjoy, so I do like going with 4 for this particular design. But here you can see I'm just adding a small bit of glue just to the top butterfly wing corners. Again, make sure that each wing is perfectly glued before going to the next side. So I'm actually using off camera, when I set this butterfly aside to then do my yellow one, I added tiny little clips to the top of those winged corners to make sure that that was nicely adhered. But here you can see all 4 of those spinning, which is really cute. Alright, on the base, I'm going to add some cut lines right where those score lines are on each side of the rectangle on the pop-up stand. I'm going to do this for the front of the card and for the back. This just adds a little area to tuck and hide my wing. And where I know I'm going to glue that wing, I'm going to add that small dot of glue, kind of feed it into that slit that I just cut, and hold it down or pinch it down to make sure that that glue is completely dried before gluing down my next wing. And I must emphasize that that is the most important part. Just be patient. Give each wing a good 2 or 3 minutes to completely dry before you glue down the next wing, and especially when you go to the back side and glue the back butterfly. So again, you can use little clips if that helps. When I do this, I normally just work on something else and let that completely dry. So here I flipped the card over. Again, I added those slits. I added, I don't know, probably a 1/4 inch down from that score line. That is where I added the cut line. So you don't need those cut lines to be super deep, just deep enough to hide that part of the wing that needs to be glued onto the base. Again, I added glue to the part of the wings that I knew were going to fit inside that slit. And here you can see I was a bit impatient and I went to glue the second part of the wing before letting the first half of the wing dry. So now I'm just sitting there and holding both wings or pinching them to the base to make sure they're nicely adhered. And again, by waiting for it to fully dry, you know that your card is going to fold flat. And essentially, those little dots of glue are the only thing holding this butterfly to the card. So waiting for it to completely dry is the most essential part of this process and important part. So I went ahead and added my With Sympathy to the front of this card. And again, I'm going to add some gems, and I'll add those to the wings of the butterfly. And I just think this card is stunning, and I really didn't spend that much time creating these butterflies. And I love that watercolor look I got with the Distress Oxide inks, and the inks are so vibrant. I love how they turned out. So here I'm going to add that rubber band to the bottom. So basically I'm going to feed each end of the rubber band through those top slits on the base. And this might be easier before adding the butterfly, but it's still easy to add it in later. And here I'll just show you how it works. So here it folds completely flat in the envelope, and then it just pops right into place. I would also suggest waiting to fold these butterflies flat until the glue is completely dried and the butterflies are fully attached to the pop-up stand. But here you can see that rubber band is a nice surprise if you want to mail these. Here is the yellow and orange monarch butterfly that I created. I just did the exact same thing, and then I used a sentiment that says, "I am here for you always," and I stamped that out with the abandoned coral distress oxide ink. Here's that flat card that we made, and then I'm just going to pull in that final pop-up stand. And I love that this video shows you two ways to use the stand. One way where you can use pretty much any die in your stash, and the other way shows you how you can use your large symmetrical die cuts or stamped images as the focal point on these cards. So I hope you enjoyed today's video tutorial. If you have any more questions or comments, please leave them down below. Remember to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will be back very soon with a pop-up birdhouse tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye!